So I started sketching in some surfaces on the body work around here, and we had this curve here, which was from some time ago. And when I look at that curve, obviously it doesn't tie up with the edge of the surface at all, because the thing we're doing here is we're going away from the data quite a bit. So just from what we discussed before about why I'm doing that. So, our sections on our surface are quite different to the mesh data, which does make it a little bit tricky to look at, because we've got multiple sections here and it's trying to relate one to the other. It might help if I changed this step size up a little bit so the sections are a bit further apart. So these are our surfaces, the blue and the yellow, and that's our mesh. So we're quite a long way away from the mesh, deliberately so, just so that we can get those parallel to each other. And this is what you often find, is that as you're working on a model, you start to deviate from the mesh, even if this was a clay model and you think it's really high quality, you can sometimes find there's reasons for moving away from the data. But the important thing is to try and keep this design intent there. So hopefully we'll be doing that. So the curve that I've got, the green line there, doesn't tie up with this edge. In fact, if I look around here, I built it to the inner side of this shape here, whereas we're actually looking at the outside shape here. So I'm going to get rid of this bit here and this bit here, because we don't need that. We actually want to pick up on this, the edges of this surface. So I'm just going to delete those. Now, the other thing we want to do is, I built this as this edge was an offset of this surface. If you remember, it was 18 mil. So I just wanted to go and check that. So if I go into locators and I go and measure the distance between a curve and a surface. So when it says curve, it always means curves or edges. So I can pick that edge of the surface there and just make sure that we are 18 mil, which we are pretty much all the way along there. And then I'll do the same thing on here. So this won't be 18 mil. It starts off at 18 mil, but it will open up. Now we can increase the scale of that so that we can actually see what's going on. And I'll also do the same thing on this locator. So in fact, if I pick both locators and go into the information window, let me try that again. And we go into here. What we want to do is make sure the scale of the deviation is the same for both of them, and then it's easy to compare. So the scale here is, on this one is just 1, this one's 11, so let's make them both 10, nice easy round numbers. So if we make them both 10, then we can see that they relate to each other, that they're the same scale. And so this is not unexpected, this is constant through here, that distance. But as we come up here, we're getting a variation from this point to here, which is what I was expecting. But what is a bit disturbing is there's a bit of a lump in the middle. So that sort of shows that we're a bit too far out compared with the glass house there. So that's something that we want to fix. So let's go into that view. The CVs aren't great either. They come out like this, which we don't want, because the CV pattern should always look like the shape that you want to create. So here we want to create a shape going one way. It sort of slightly S's towards that end, but essentially most of that is all going one way. So the CVs should also do the same thing. So this one actually needs to come inboard anyway. So I'm just going to move that inboard. And you can see now the distance between that and the glass house looks much more sensible. This one could come out a little bit. So having moved that one in, if I move that one out again, we get more or less the same shape as before. And I'm just looking at the pattern of CVs going through here. This is fine because that's S'ing, but these ones all want to curve the one way. And at the same time, we've got to just make sure that distance there is progressive. It gradually increases rather than having a lump in the middle. So that looks okay. Right, so let's work on this area here. So we've got this curve here, which, like I say, is on the inside edge, not the outside edge. We can use that curve, we can reuse that, and the same with that curve. Again, that's on the inside, not the outside. We want it on the outside. So I'm going to just offset that so that we can reuse those curves. So I think how many curves we've got there? We have got, sort of looks like there's something else going on there. No, there's just the one curve there, and that was just a blend between the center part and that area there. So we'll just offset these. Right, so we can offset that. Now the offset distance, so you can see the purple line is just showing us where it's going to go to. The offset distance, we'll just make it, it's got to tie in with this blue line, this blue edge here. So we can modify it in the slider here. We can also use Alt to slow it down a bit. That's going the wrong way. So I'm just looking at that compared with that, and we could probably say it's about 8 mil by the looks of things, maybe 8.5 or something, just so it ties up with that, and then we'll offset that. So that was a good guess, wasn't it? And then we can do the same thing on this next one. So we just got to make sure we pick the right object. So again, just press the space bar to get that. And then I'll get rid of the, I think I'll get rid of these original curves because they're just confusing. Have those on there. And I'll also put those onto that layer so they're green so I can see them easily. Now I've offset those two curves. The chances are that won't be aligned anymore. So we want to align those. So this is G2. I want it to there. I'll take create history off. And then this one can be aligned into here. Now you notice it's got two arrows on there. So I did the align, but it's got two arrows on, which tells us that it's not quite on the end. So I'll just drag that along and it's now on the end. So a little detail that's so important. Now, because I've just done it in top view, you can see by aligning that, actually it doesn't look very good at all because it's raised it up in Z because the end of this is curving up. So let's squash that up a bit. And we'll have a look at that. It might be worth, no, it doesn't make any difference really. I was going to say put a curve on that edge, but we don't really need it. We can just use the edge itself. This other edge I'm going to sort out later. So let's move this point up and down. Now, of course, I did say I wasn't going to put history on, but I do want history on. Again, just make sure that's on the end. It should be this time. And then I'm going to move that end point of that surface up and down. I'm just going to slow it down a bit by putting some mouse sensitivity on and squash that down until it looks closer to the data, but also it's got to be a nice shape. And we could put the curvature on those edges as well, couldn't we? And so I've gone to the locators curvature there. Comb scale needs to increase that. So it looks like that. We also want it on here. And so you've got the same comb scale on both of those. And you can see we've got G2 continuity, but it doesn't look very good at the moment because it's flattening off so much here. So we want to make that a little bit better. And so I'm now going to go into transforming the CVs again, but I'll increase the mouse sensitivity, maybe above 50, slow it right down. So now when we do this, that's going to have an effect. So we're trying to get, what I'm trying to do is get this a bit more constant, I think, and then feed into this. So it'll involve, because it involves curvature, it's that point, and that point that are going to have an effect. But the other thing that does have an effect is that fourth point, which affects how this flows into here. In other words, how close to G3 it is. So I could align it in G3, but you've got to bear in mind that in plan view, that might cause it to go off a lot. So you just have to go backwards and forwards, trying to massage that shape. But also, of course, I don't want to deviate too much from the data. I want to get pretty close to that data. In here, let's just take that one out of the equation. So we take those CVs off. The other thing we can do, and we can squash this up even more if we want as well, because if we look at these CVs, they don't look, that one particularly doesn't look great. So we need to move those up and down a bit. And that also has an effect on the curvature, of course. This, not sure where the end is. I think it's that one there. Or is it there? No, that's the end. Of course it is, because I can see from the curvature. And of course that's aligned into that front edge there. So by moving some of these, I think that one there, yeah, that's the fourth point along, so we can move that one. But the third point, because it's G2 continuous into there, we shouldn't be moving the third point because it's defined by the front curve. But of course we could change the front curve in time if we wanted to as well. That one I can't move because it's determined by the curvature at this end. So I'm deviating from the data a little bit here. But eventually it's the most important thing is to have a smooth shape going through. I think I'm just going to leave that as it is. When we come out of there, you can see, you know, it doesn't look any different to the data particularly. It might be that front curve needs a bit of adjustment. And this is because this is 3D curvature we're looking at. When you change the view, you're now seeing it in a different view. So we're seeing how this is developing this way. So you could say that, you know, maybe we could adjust that point, for example, to try and get this to work a little bit better. So I'm adjusting it just in the Y direction. I think that'll do. You know, you can spend as long as you want. You can spend days doing some of this stuff if you wanted to, you know, if you've got the time, if that's the quality that you want to achieve. But as we're doing a concept model, really, a concept model with very tight tolerances is like, you know, I've got this. I mean, one thing I should point out really is that the construction settings I've got are what we've said we should work to if we were doing A-class work, 0.001 gap tolerance, which is ridiculously tight for a concept model. So normally with a concept model, you wouldn't set it that tight. You might set it to 0.005 or 0.01 even. But there's no real need to go that tight. It's just that this is trying to show you that you can actually align things to very tight tolerances. So we're not really doing it's a sort of halfway house between a concept model and what you might do if you're doing an A-class model. So we've got these curves here, which we're reasonably happy with, and this is the outside edge. So on this area here, we've got that curve is G2 continuous into here. We can then use, and this is whenever I'm using a surfacing tool, it's not that this is the method to use, it's just a way of getting a surface in initially. So, you know, we put in these surfaces, I think using MS Draft, it really sort of doesn't matter because I've then gone and modified the surface. And likewise around here, I'm going to use a rail surface just because I've got a curve there and an edge there to use. So I'm going to use one generation curve, one rail curve, and I'm just going to go for that. So the generation curve's that, rail curve's that, and we'll have a look at that. So I've got sweep mode natural. What you don't want is parallel because that just keeps the angle the same. So we want natural, and it sort of fans out as it goes around the corner. But the CVs aren't great going around that corner at all. But it's a starting point. It gives us something to work with, and So I can then modify it. And one way of modifying that is to, if we take that curve there, obviously that's got some reasonably good CVs on it. I mean, looking at it again, it's actually, this is rather weird around here, to be honest. So I'm going to just, because I've got history on that rail curve there, I'm just going to have a look at that in top view. Yeah, it seems to me that we're coming away from this data a little bit too much here. In fact, one thing I didn't do is measure between that curve there and this surface here. So we should see whether that's developing in a nice way. Yeah, so there's an area there. You can see that this is the distance. So we'd expect it to increase gradually all the way around here, but in the middle it's increased too much and then it's come back on itself. So in fact this curve here needs to come inboard a bit. You can also see that relative to the data, and also when you look at the CVs, they look a bit odd just around there. So I'm going to also, let's have a look at this one. So we'll go to that one and that surface there, and I'll just visually increase the scale and the number of spines. So I'm using the middle mouse button just to increase the number of spines. So that looks okay. Maybe, well, it's sort of it's bigger in the middle and smaller at the outside edge. I think that's okay. I mean, most of that's cut away because you get to this point and then it is all cut away. So it's only this middle bit really that matters. But what I'm now going to do is align this curve. Having said, I'm not going to use history. Again, I'm putting history on, but that's what you have to do sometimes. So I've got history on there. I'm just going to see if we adjust these, the spacing of the CVs bothers me a little bit there, that was looking a bit peculiar. So that's the spacing looks better to me now. And then I'm going to move this point because that's the one that's mainly affecting this area. So let's move that inboard in Y. So I'm looking at the deviation to the glass there. I'm actually moving it not just in Y. In fact, I'm using the left mouse button just to move it in all directions. Well, in X and Y. So I want this to be as progressive as possible, and probably that point as well could also be moved. And it is coming away from the data, you know, sort of almost touching that data there, where it's slightly different to the model, but I think it's sufficiently close and it's getting more of the character. I mean, on the screen, if you were rendering this, you don't really see the varying gap. It's if you were to mill the model in foam or clay or something, you would notice the gap. So for that purposes, you know, that's why that gap is important. It develops, and it's also 3D. So when we look at it from the top view, actually, it's not really giving us the full picture, but you can see that that's much more progressive now. It looks much more in tune with the glass there. Let's save this. So what I was saying about this, so this rail surface here, if I query edit that, you can see I've got the history on it, which is fortunate because then I don't need to adjust that edge there. It sort of seems to have helped the CVs on this edge, which is just a bit of luck, really. But what I want to do is tidy those up a bit more so they're more consistent with these CVs on the inner edge. And the simplest way of doing that is to take that curve, copy and paste it. So Control C, Control V, and then we can just move it out there. I'll just move it somewhere that I can see it easily. Put the pivot on one end, move it to this end here. Bearing in mind that we're talking 3D, so in the 2D view it looks fine. We can then do a non-proportional scale on that. So we just scale it that way, or we can do a stretch on it. So non-proportional scale sometimes does the trick, but stretch is the other thing that we can do. So I can then stretch that. I'll add a handle in the middle, like we've done before, and just move that out to there, for example. So I don't know whether you started using this. That's actually not in. I'm not in the right version of my. I've gone back to 2024, just because there was a problem with there's a problem in 2025. A few problems I found in 2025 the other day, so I thought I'd stick to 2024. But in 2025, of course, you've got the puck now, which I'm finding is really, really useful. Okay, so I've taken that curve and stretched it to there, between those two endpoints. So if we look at that in the side view, it's actually pretty much spot on. I mean, as I've said, the CVs down here are rubbish at the minute, but all I'm doing here is just to use that curve there to align this rail surface to. So if we take that surface there, I don't have to delete the history, but I'm going to do it that way, delete the history, and then align it. I mean, if I tried to align it, it would tell me that there's history on it and it won't do it, but I can delete the history first instead. So I'm just going to align that rail surface to that curve, and you can see that still doesn't look good. And the reason is because the position influence is 0, so it's keeping the CVs more or less where they are. I want that to be on 1, and then it'll be exactly the same as the curve. And of course, having done that, I could have got the same sort of result by skinning between the two curves there. So it really doesn't matter how you get these, achieve this. It's, the rail was just a way of getting something in, and it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong, because I'm now going to delete that curve, don't need the curve. And you can see from the sections there that in terms of 3D, I'm not close to the data. But in plan view, it looked all right. So I'm going to put on X and I'm going to put on Z. I'm actually going to put on more X now, like that 100 mil again. And I'm going to take the top area off because that's a bit difficult to see now. I mean, the whole thing's a bit difficult to see, to be honest. Sometimes it's easier to shade it and just. You can see now maybe a bit more clearly that the sections there, maybe I've just got too many sections on. Maybe it's easier if I just put the Y sections on. Now you can see clearly that section is way below there, which is not surprisingly because we've just railed it from this end. So let's use transform CV, and I'm going to use proportional modification from this end, and I just want to blend it all the way around to wherever that is. Up to there, and then we just pull that up in the Z direction, reducing the mouse sensitivity down to 1, so I can just do that quickly. And it's very useful to have the shading on at this point so that you can see, because we were so far away. So that's pretty close to the section there. I'm roughing this in, so I'm just want now single points. So I'm just move those up and down in Z, just roughing it to those sections. You can see the sections there, and of course I've only got degree 1 here, so this is not a nice shape. A minute, let's put those X on there, and again at this end, these will need aligning, but these also need modification, and it's just a question of roughing it. So let's make that one, rough that in there, and then we can align it. I'll put G2 on. It doesn't matter that there's an error. It's 0.1 of a degree. It's very small, and like I said, we only got degree 2 there, so it doesn't really matter, or degree 1 rather. If I put vector on in Z, then we know that in plan view these CVs aren't changing. I've got create history on there, so I could just roughly move that around, just so the sections come a bit closer there, but I'm not going to worry too much. I just want something that's rough as anything around this area. Now in the center, You know, we're trying to, when we start off from here, there's two distinct things going on here. You've got this surface comes around here, or will do, and then it comes off at a different angle. As you go further back, it becomes more and more noticeable. You've got that surface, and then that surface will be going into it. As you go round here, looking at those sections, we get to a point where this is just one continuous surface. It's not two separate surfaces. So this is what we need to build in the center here. So I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to just save this. And we've got a curve that goes right across the center line. So we want a surface that goes right across the center line as well. Probably don't need it to be quite as long as that. It's always useful to have it, you know, oversized, but maybe that's useful. Let's just try that. The section here looks like it has a bit of a tighter curvature here, sort of quite flat there, and then it's tighter there, and then it's quite rounded all the way to the front. And we could take, so looking at this is our center section here, because I've got data that goes across the center. If you're not quite sure, you can go into put the grid on and just see that. So let's just put a curve in here. So I'm going to go all the way, I'm going to try and go all the way from here to here. Now that's doesn't matter that that's too low. I should put that, because it's a curve, let's put it on here. And I'll just increase the degree a little bit. And we're just going to move that point up in the Z direction. Well, I can just snap it to that section, to be honest. I mean, it doesn't matter that it doesn't quite go to the back edge. For now, we're going to extend it further. So let's have a look at that. And we'll extend this. Oh, don't know what I pressed there, but something not quite right. So let's extend this way. And we'll increase the degree a little bit. Actually, we won't do that. Let's come out of there. So we can also move this point forward in X. So we can push it a bit towards the front edge, so we get a bit more curvature going on there. Actually, it's not. When I was looking at those lines there, it's probably an illusion that I was thinking that seemed to have a little bit of a bend in there, but it doesn't look like we do have a bend in there. So it looks like most of the shape is towards the front edge there. Let's increase the degree now. So whenever you've got, you know, if we look at the curvature on that, because I pushed the CVs towards the front edge, that's telling me that the curvature, I'm looking at the shape, the curvature is increasing towards the front edge there. So if we go and put the curvature on, you should see that, exactly that. So I'm using Alt here just to increase the comb scale there, so you can see that's what's going on. So there's pushing the CVs towards the front means we can get away with fewer CVs, a lower degree, than if we just had them all equally spaced. Now there's a very tight bend at the front, and that may be that we'll need a separate surface there. In fact, I'm pretty certain that we will. At a later stage, we'll have a separate surface that's just doing that front edge for us. I'm just moving these up and down in Z, in X as well. Now this is just one section, so you know we could spend a long time doing the one section, but the chances are that you might find as you put a surface off this that actually the shape changes as we go outboard. So there's no point in spending too long on the one curve. The other thing that we want to do, so we've got this curve and this curve, so this is what we're going to use to create our shape. We want those to join up. So I'll do that, and then I'll trim that in that view. And then we can snap that point onto this curve here. So I'm going to move that, and you can see I've got a snap point there just on the center. And the reason I've got that snap point on there is if we go into the curve snap options, I've got all of these things set up. So I've got snap to center there, and it'll find automatically that center position then. And so now we can do a rail here. With rail, if I undo that, if I do it this way, we get a very different result. We've got it says natural. Let's just take these sections off. I've got a natural on. If I made it parallel, we get something similar to the result we had when I picked that as the generation curve. But the other thing that's also worth noting is that we've got two spans by picking it this way. We've said generation curve, and it's because that generation curve's in the middle. So if I do it the other way, so I'll make that the generation curve and this one, you notice we've got one span. If you're not sure, because to be honest, I'm never quite sure whether that's going to give me one or two spans, but if you're not sure, have a look in there, because you only want one span. We don't want to increase the number of spans or the degree from what we've got on the curves. So just make sure that you've got that. If I say natural, you get a slightly different result, but it doesn't, you just pick whatever options give you the result that you want. Usually natural's the better one, but we're just creating an initial surface here, so it really doesn't matter. I prefer that one because it looks more regular, in fact, in this case, and we're going to modify it all, so it really doesn't matter which method you use there in this particular instance. So let's bring everything back in, take the grid off, and that is incredibly close to that shape. So that's very again, it's just luck, because I've not given it a front edge or anything to work with, so it's just that the shape that's there just happens to be that sort of natural shape, which is rather good because it saves us some work. But there'll still be modifications to do. You can see the deviation to the data around here. What we want to make sure is that we don't. So let's take all of the CVs off these curves. Where have the curves gone? That one there. What we wanted to do is we don't want to, in trying to get to the data, we also want a smooth shape. So we don't want to create something that's not smooth. So you've got to be careful with your CVs. The other thing is, if I start moving this around, so it'll tell me I've got history on, which I'm quite happy to get rid of because I need to get rid of it. But if I start moving this side, of course, my deliberate mistake there is I haven't got symmetry on, and symmetry is the thing that can catch you out, and does catch me out quite regularly, because maybe not in that instance, but it's very easy not to realize you haven't got symmetry on because you've done some operation which has deleted the symmetry, because symmetry is a history function, essentially. It's and if you align this to something, history gets broken, so the symmetry gets broken. So you've got to constantly make sure that you put your symmetry on. So just make sure that that's on, and every so often, just put it on again. And it's something that you'll notice because eventually what we're going to do is trim the whole model down the center, and when you mirror it across and you find that you haven't got continuity in the middle, it's because your symmetry got broken at some point. And it's not something that you want to happen, because if you filleted everything, it's just an absolute pain to fix it. Right, so let's have a look at this and see what we can do with this. So I think let's just take all the CVs off, and then I'll just put the CVs on here. So I think the first thing to do would be to get that front edge looking similar to what we've got on the mesh there, and you can see that's quite different, so we need to stretch that a bit. So this is another case of using Pmod on here, so we'll stretch that edge there and move that in the X direction. So bearing in mind we're overlapping the data, so we want this to overlap it as well. We want that to sort of be parallel to where the data is there. Because we're moving that in the X direction, this will now be lifting it off the data underneath. And if we're necessary, we'd move that point as well. It doesn't look as though that needs much of a tweak. If you want to, you can rotate the view around this way and squash the whole thing up. It might be useful, just so we can see a bit more of the relationship between those two edges. And then if I go into the top view there, and then I can move that backwards and forwards in X, just to try and get those parallel. That should help in developing this. You might even move that point there as well, but this is affecting the Z values. So I've still got Pmod on, so it's affecting those points there. So it's giving us a blended result, but like I say, it's going to be changing in the Z direction. You can see it's lifted it up here. So let's have a look at that from the front. Now, I guess it's quite difficult to see all of this lot, and of course we could go into the mesh and just take off the glass house. That would help a little bit, but even then you've got a lot of data there. You could split the data up, of course, if you want to. If it's a real pain, you can do that. Now this front edge ought to be following this line here. You can see, what happens with surfaces is that we got down to this edge, and really we should be building the whole of this lower edge at the same time as doing all of this. So it might be that that's the sensible thing to do. I'm now going to pick that point there. Now I've still got Pmod on, and the reason for doing that is it keeps a blended. It blends the change rather than just doing it very locally. But that gets a point where we might have to do that. We might have to start moving individual CVs around. Well, that inevitably happens. So you progress from moving the whole surface around to moving holes around to moving CVs around. I'm looking at the section down here. We can't go all the way to the front edge because, as I said, we're going to have a little surface there to just take in that shape here. Also looking at the section here, and sometimes it's worth just rotating this slightly so we can open out the view and see what's going on in here. So this needs to become much flatter here. So now I'm going to go into move individual points. We're actually moving that point and that point, of course, because of symmetry. So what's happening? This section looks okay. It's parallel to the mesh, which is fine. This section here only takes us up to this point, and then this billows out. It becomes a different shape. I'm looking at the center here. We need to get this to this height, because if we don't, then we won't have enough room to get that feature in later on. So in fact, it looks like we've come too far down on all of this area. So I think I need to move individual CVs around to do this. So I'm moving these in the Z direction. So I'm not quite in the front view, but it just helps to just see more clearly the sections that we've got here. This section actually is curving this way. It's concave in this view, and it's because it goes into that back edge. So I know that this, when we get to putting this feature in, if the height of this section isn't quite correct, then that feature is going to be tricky to get into the right spot. So looking along here, that this is going to be super critical, that we're pretty close to that. But at the same time, we need to be looking at the CV patterns and making sure that we've got CV patterns that are consistent with each other. So I'm looking at trying to look at the pattern of CVs going that way versus that one going that one and that one. So they gradually blend from one end to the other. And because we're doing such a, we're covering a lot of mesh with this one surface, so it's a little bit tricky, but it's much better than, the temptations to split this up into lots of little surfaces. And the problem then is that you'll struggle then to get good highlights and things. I mean, at some point this might be split into separate surfaces, but we want to start off with the biggest surface we can and only split it up later on. So again, I'm looking very much at this edge out here. I'm not sure whether this mesh there should be a continuation. No, it shouldn't. If we look at the section there, that comes up quite a long way. So this feature here is growing out of this. It might blend to nothing at the back, but it's growing. So we're not trying to hit that section at all. We're just trying to hit that section and particularly that edge in this area, but at the same time trying to get close to what's going on down here. So looking at this section, that's another set of surfaces splitting off from here. So it's only when we get to the front edge that I think that's one shape. Here it's not, and so we're really looking at obviously the back edge there, or the bits that are going to be remaining of this surface are all of this area coming down here, and then it'll wash out into something here. So most of that gets cut away, but we do need to make sure that that's accurate in the center as much as we can. It's worth isolating that and taking the sections off just to see what the CVs look like. Let's have a look at that from the pure front view. They look a bit weird. That one particularly looks weird from this angle. I'm just going to save that. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong. It's just not what you'd ideally want to see. And it is such a simple surface. It's very, very low degree. So I'm thinking that one needs to come down, because at the moment we've got this zigzag. This one is all going one way. The back edge goes the other way, which is fine. We need this to go that way because of the center shape, but I just feel I need to pull that one down. So I'm going to pull that down in Z. If I do that, so I'll pull that down about there, pull that down a bit, and then push that one up. So if you pull one down, pull another one up, and the chances are, hopefully, that we're reasonably close to the data. We'll only find out when we put the data back on, of course, and compare it with the mesh. But there you can see we're still pretty much on that mesh, but I've moved those CVs so that they look nicer. And it's not just the CVs, of course, you don't see in the final model, but what you do see is the highlights, and the highlights are so dependent on the CVs being in the right place. So CVs tell you so much about the shape. Now, I did say about this lower edge that we ought to build that whole lower edge at some point, but I'm going to leave that for the time being because I think we're reasonably close to where we want to be. I'm just going to try and keep the model fairly loose and rough. So we're trying to rough these surfaces in. If we have to change this front edge a little bit to make sure that we get this feature going through here, this edge going through here, we can do that later. It won't have a massive effect on this end, So even if we align things at this edge, it won't be the end of the world if we have to change this edge slightly. The trouble is you go down here and then you start working on here, and then before you know it, you're having to work down here, and you really wanted to do this bit. So you end up going around in circles if you're not careful. Now, so we want to try and get this whole set of surfaces in here. So let me just isolate that, and we'll look at curvature. So the curvature is a bit strange because we go from it curving one way at the back edge to curving the other way, and that's just the shape that it is. And then we do that curvature there. Usually with the curvature I put on the same, so we've got only 3 sets of curvature here. What I would do is put on the same number of curvature values here as we've got holes. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 holes going that way. So if you make that 5, then each of these curvatures is sort of related to the nearest CVs. This one's a slightly different, but it means that the CVs closest to that have most effect on that curvature. So the curvatures look okay, in the sense that there's no inflections in it. It's a complex shape, it's going across a large area, so the fact that it changes, that we get curvature that looks slightly different at this end to the center, probably doesn't matter. Back edge, that looks fairly consistent. And the other thing that we can do, of course, is put some diagnostics on. So if we use ISOANG, this is the one that I would use for analyzing the quality of that surface. So looking at that, this is saying that we've got, if you imagine a light source from the Z direction, these are the lines of same angle relative to that Z direction. So if you follow this line along here, it's all at the same angle to the Z direction. They call it highlights, but it's not, in a sense, it's not really. It's the way that the tangency changes across the surface. So we can look at that from the Z direction. We can look at it from the X direction. So we're looking for this sort of shape, and we don't want sort of SE shapes or anything. And from the Y direction, it's going to look really weird because we've got this sort of concave bit here in 3D and convex there. So that in this area here, we've got an inflection point between those two areas, and that's why we're getting this large area where it sort of does a rather strange looking thing. But let's increase the number of bands. So as you increase the number of bands, you can see a bit more definition there, but it's because there's an inflection there that's what's going on. The other thing that we can do, so this is just looking at the highlights, but you can also look at this horizontal vertical, which is really just showing you continuity between surfaces. It's not really useful for the shape as such. And then if you want a sort of more realistic view, you've got this one, this option here with various different settings, which just give you a more sort of realistic feel for what that might look like in reality. But ISOANG is the one that's really critical. Now this surface here that we created earlier on, this needs to align into this big surface. First of all, it's only degree 1, so it's not going to align. But the other thing is we'd need to work out exactly where this surface needs to go to. So there's on this inlet here, there's a feature line comes around here. It's got a sharp bend there, which you can just about see in the sections there, comes around here and then sort of washes out to nothing. There's obviously the section coming across here. We've got this big surface is covering the section up to a certain point, and then it sort of starts to move away from that. So it's trying to work out where we need to go with that. I think this surface may need to extend, and then that will be the blended area between the two. There's also, it ends here, so you've got this section comes down here and then changes angle again, so there'll be a hard line across here. It's one of those areas that until you've actually surfaced it, you don't really know what you need to do with it. When we get down to here, it's really only covering this bit here, and of course, because it's degree 1, we haven't got any of the shape that we need at the minute, but that doesn't matter. We'll tackle that in a minute. So let's just take the CVs off the big surface there. So I just need to make this surface a little bit bigger going forward here, so that we've got, so that it'll cover this area in this area. And I think, you know, the way these surfaces come together may change as I work on this, because I'm not sure whether to actually use this surface in this area or whether to put in another surface. I don't think I'll be able to take that surface and push it down any further. Yeah, I don't know. Let's have a look. Let's go to the back view. So if we squash that up and just see whether, so if I'm looking at that section there, it does seem to sort of curve away quite rapidly, and it doesn't look to me as though I could get that with this one surface here. If I start pulling this surface down, then we're going to deviate too much from the point here, which we're slightly low on anyway. Like I say, then we'll lose that feature definition. But I'm just wondering whether to put in another surface across here, for example, that just blends down this area. It's going to be a tricky area, and I think we may have to modify this a little bit as well to get it all to work together. So sometimes you'll see me just moving the model around and doing nothing, because I'm just trying to work out what to do. Let's take that mesh and just shade that up, which we can't see very clearly. If we put, I mean, you can put these, that's really not going to help. And we've got the funny sort of mottled effect there is because we've got in here, we've got meshes on, transparency. We've also got the quality. So the mesh density is at 0.8. So we're not getting all of the triangles. So if I make that 1, then we get it all solid. So that's what we really want. We want to be able to see that. The transparency is useful, you know, if you want to get rid of those lines or bring them all in and see exactly where the triangles are on the mesh. You can do that with this transparency option there. So I'm just trying to see where this all goes to. So really, we just need to get this to cover this area, and then this will be cut into it. It'll sort of wash out to nothing somewhere around there. I think I'm just going to do a P mod on this, and we'll just blend that back to a certain point, and I'll move that up in this direction. So we're just trying to cover that area. I don't like the way this is stretching, so I can change that. It's in the U direction, so if we change that value, we can change it after the event. So by changing that, you can get a different sort of spacing. Also, I can, of course, go back to individual points, move those around. So I'm just moving them in. As you can see, I'm just moving them in the plan view, in the top view. And it's just to get some spacing in that view of the CVs. So what that's doing in 3D, I don't know. I don't care at this point. I'm just trying to cover that area up with something that's hopefully going to allow us to cover this area that we want to cover. So let's turn that round that way. I don't know what this is going to do here, but let's just align it. And I know this is only degree 1, so it's not going to align properly, but I'm trying to rough it in. So I'm going to project that in the Z into that surface there, that rail surface there. So you can see that's brought it down, which is good. So the white section is the section that we've now got there. I can put a bit of blending on it, so it brings in the next point here. Actually, that doesn't help, does it? We just do whatever we need to do to get that to blend in. Of course, this is not aligned because it's only degree 1. It's going to have to be degree 2 at least. I've got create history on there, so if I go into, which I didn't really plan, it was just happened to be switched on, but it does mean I can go query edit and go and change the degree up a little bit, just to degree 2. I don't want to rush into, you know, if I made it degree 3, then of course it's going to align, but you want to keep it low degree while you're at this stage of roughing things in. Otherwise, you're just giving yourself more difficulties of moving more CVs around. Now, because it starts to get difficult to see what's going on in these areas, sometimes it's worth just trimming this main surface, even though we've got very little to trim it to. We've only got that curve on surface, but we could just go into plan view. You can put on a curve, for example, from that end point out this way, and then we can do a trim. So we can go into surface edit, do a project trim in the Z direction. So I've just trim it to that curve there. So obviously it's not what we want, but it just makes it clearer to see what's going on in that area, that this is what we're trying to achieve. It's something like this. So this is covering this area, and then we'll have that other feature coming off at a different angle. One thing that bothers me about these surfaces here is that they're different lengths. And it would be good to have those the same length. And obviously that's the length there. So let's go and I'm just going to measure what that distance is there. So using that distance function there, which is not what we want, just that point there. Let me just isolate that surface. Easier. So that says 125 or thereabouts. So the reason for doing that is if I go and pick those two surfaces there, isolate those. So it was roughly 125. So we'll just extend this a little bit further. Now I can measure between this edge and this one. So that's 166. So we've got enough length there. What I'm going to do is trim those all to the same length. Just makes it easier to compare the two and join everything up. So I had said 125. So if I go into pick that edge there, it gives me this curve on surface here, whatever that value is. So I said 125. You're going off the edge there. So why is that? Let me just, so it's created a bit of a curve on surface, but that's not quite where I was expecting it to do it to. So that says 142. So why is that coming up with the wrong? I would expect that to be inside the surface. Tubular offset. It's that tangent offset should be 0. That's it. So the tangent offset means it's moving it. So if I change the tangent offset to, let me make it 1. It's going right down there. It's moving the center from where I've got it there to down here. So we don't want that. We want tangent offset to be 0. In other words, to use that edge, not anything else. So that's giving us that curve on surface. And the next one can be that one. Get rid of these locators. And then we could do a trim convert. On here, so we don't need 3D trimming. So now they're all the same length. I mean, it won't quite join up with there because that was just approximate, but we can then, of course, align that together, and it will make sure it's the same length. So we've got edge on there, and align that to there. Again, the fact that it's got a small angle mismatch at the minute doesn't matter. We're roughing stuff in. So I think I'm going to have to leave it at that point, but you know, the plan is to obviously get all of this to align here, to get some shape in here, because we've only got degree 1 at the minute going through that particular surface there. I think they should all be probably degree 2 going across. This one will probably need to be degree 3 just to get it to align into this center surface eventually. But first of all, we'll do degree 2 and just try and get some positive crown on all of these before we get them all to align. And then it's going to be a question of, you know, building the other surfaces around this, of course.